just going over some basics on graphing. Graphing is really helped to take numeric data and make it easier to understand. And a lot of times when you're looking at data files, it gets a little blurry. And by summarizing, say, by month or year or enter or vendor, you can get a better graphical idea of the relationships. As to the different types of charts, the column, line, bar, maybe even pie charts that are just of one line and over a time frame or by project as example is the most simple form of graph, followed by more of a two-axis graph, which can be shown in a bar and line type two-axis graph, and we will go over that. Area charts are very useful if you want to take a look at data over time, by quarter, by year, by month, and to say do a grouping by vendor and year can make a very interesting graph. But probably what's better, if you were to do it on vendor, I would do it more on vendor type or a data feed into our accounts payable system, and then by month and etc. The XY or scatter graph I actually think is one of the better graphs for looking at a lot of data at once. As opposed to summarizing it, you can just put it all on a data plot and try to make some sense of it. This is contrary to most graphing techniques, which tries to summarize data. The scatter graph, actually its goal is to show all of the data. Now, there are some graphing tools out there like Kaleidograph. It's a relatively inexpensive tool, but does allow a lot more data input into the chart or graph. Excel does have some limits on charting, which we'll talk about in a minute or two, and sometimes those limits are better to be overcome by getting a product like Kaleidograph. And this one is actually showing us by month the spend by vendor, but it's, I think, showing about 20 to 30,000 vendors at once. And again, the red is January and purple is December, and it just kind of goes through that spectrum. Now you can drill into this graph at a very low, high resolution rate, so that you can get down into each particular line to understand more about it. And I will say Excel can do quite a bit of graphing. I believe it can graph up to 32,000 of these lines. So I mean, it isn't something that it isn't a lightweight when it comes to this graphing, but it is something that sometimes goes beyond Excel, as well as in calculating that graph. Kaleidograph can be quite quick, whereas Excel at times, when you start loading so much data into it in this type of fashion, it gets a little hard to render that chart for your review. Another consideration is just mapping the actual population of, say, vendors or payroll employees. And this is using a product, MapPoint, which is something you can buy in addition to normal Excel Office licenses. But you can get that and take a look at how you load in the address and zip code and amount data, how it renders itself on this map. And over to the left we have the legend, and at this level it's quite hard to see very much. And actually in that top graph you can see the world, and actually as you move your cursor around, that blue box will move around, and you can actually do more of a worldwide search for vendors and employees and such. And this is interesting. I mean, you may find that you have parties or work that's happening in other countries. You may see a concentration in certain areas and decide to do even maybe more business in those areas, or you may see a very strange trend where you have lots of, let's say, low dollar vendors in a certain area, but yet then you have one massive vendor, and it's just kind of interesting to see those makeups. It could be fraud, it could be just a strange phenomenon of that area, but something that you can look at. And again, outside of Excel graphing, I do like to throw these other type of graph techniques in, because they are very useful in understanding your data, but yet tend to go beyond the limits of Excel. When we talk about those limits, these are the specific ones for 2007 and 10. And as you look at the certain limits here, 32,000 is the number of data points for a 2D chart, and something that 32,000 data points. So we have to be a little careful. I mean, if you have 30,000 vendors, you start to very quickly hit that limit. If you do like a monthly analysis, it'd be times 12 at that point. So you have to kind of be a little careful with how many data points that you would be putting into this tool. And again, where you may want to go further. But what I generally find is that by summarizing things down into, for your charting techniques anyway, either through pivot techniques or just on your own where you'd manually kind of summarize this, that tends to lead to a much smaller subset than 32,000. So I find Excel handles 95% if not more of my graphing needs, but yet there are these other tools, and we need to be aware of these limits. But what we planned on doing is first talking about the doing more of a two-dimensional type analysis where you'll have, say, a risk or just impact being graphed, and then we'll go to more of a two scenario where we're looking at risk and impact in a variety of ways, and then we're going to do a three type of analysis or three data series type analysis where we'll have risk, impact, and then cost. And we're going to take a look at projects. It could be your audit projects for the year, and how you might want to graph them from a risk, impact, and also a cost perspective. So as we come over to Excel, we have a project summary with risk, impact, and cost all outlined and summarized here. And then what we're going to do is first take a look at the project. I'm just doing a pie chart here where I highlighted this initial data here, project 1 through 10, as well as the risk scores for each one of those projects. Now, if I do that, and maybe I'll just highlight project and risk, okay, and then say insert pie chart, two-dimensional pie, I will then have the projects 1 through 10 listed out along with the associated risk. Now that is what we have here, and that's kind of this one-dimensional chart. Now if I wanted to change this chart, let's just kind of move this up here out of the way and very quickly change the chart type to, say, a column, a very nice looking column, let's say in this case, and have it nice in 3D. I just have to right click and select change chart type. If I wanted to select different data, if I wanted to, instead of doing risk, now do impact, I could edit that series. And right here we're looking at the series B4 to B13 as your data. I'm going to highlight now B4 to, C4 to C13. And now we have impact. And you know, just to put the series name, which didn't come through in Excel, we can put impact there, and now that's our impact. If I want to add another series to this, I can also do that, and I can highlight the risk series here. I can then say in the series name, select risk, and I've now added the risk and impact to this chart. So now I have a two-dimensional chart. Once again, something we just kind of quickly created over here. And last but not least, I wanted to do a bit of a three-dimensional chart, or you know, having two, and in this case I'm using an area chart where I've, let me just show you the chart type. We're actually selecting a particular area type, and the area is a more columnar area, excuse me, right up here. So it was this stacked column, and then for this line here, that is the project cost. So, you know, how do we have sort of two graphs on one? It's a little confusing, and you can do that. You can have, you know, many graphs on one, but what I've done here is I've changed the actual axis so that one of them, this project cost, is the axis where we have a cost, whereas risk and impact are in more of an area chart. So to do that, we're just going to go to the select data. It kind of makes it a little easier. Taking a look at that project side, again, project is D4 through D13, and instead of the series name being that, we're actually going to change it to cost because that is more accurate. and we'll hit OK. Now that is that data series cost. It's the green line. I'm going to right click that entire data series and say change series chart type. I can change it to whatever I'd like, or let's right click that. I can go to format data series. It's a little bit hidden in my opinion, a little bit hidden, and I change that to a secondary axis. Now if I go to primary axis, notice that the cost from a scale of point of view completely erases the risk and impact, because the risk and impact used to be 1 through 10. Now I have 10,000, 20,000, etc., which is just completely getting rid of it. So if I put something that is sort of offbeat, something that's out of line with the other data, and put that on a secondary axis, I'm able to still view that data, and it looks quite good from a scale point of view. Any additional data series that I put on this chart that are in the 10,000 to 800 or 80,000 range in this case, I would also want to put on that secondary axis, and you could have multiple lines in this case instead of just the one. Again, it could be risk and then an opportunity one as well, and hopefully they're somewhat similar, so that it would make sense to put them on that same secondary axis. If you'd ever like to learn anything about scale, I would suggest taking a look at edwardtuff.com, and you can just go to this website. It'll bring you right to a variety of books and other information about Edward Tufte. I believe he's a Yale professor and has a number of books out there. I must note I've loaned out my books, and they seem to constantly be in loan status because people love them and always write me back emails about how they love this page or that page. So there are various articles and books, and I find that Tufte does a great job of explaining data ink and scale and all of these concepts that really come to play when you start looking at different data in one chart, and it's very difficult to do that, and it ends up ruining the scale and you don't see things. So again, take a look at this website for more information on that and some better techniques on graphing. Back into Excel, I wanted to take a look at this bubble chart and just get a quick sense. This is another chart type that you can highlight. What you're going to want to do is highlight all of your data as part of this bubble chart exercise, and then insert the bubble chart. Now the bubble chart is not listed on here, so we're going to have to go to our other charts, and I've selected this one here. And that is a pretty good representation of what we have on this other page, so I'm just going to delete that, kind of head over here, a little nicer here. And I wanted to highlight a few of the things that I did to this chart, just to note. First off, aside from getting into the technicalities of setting it up, we have atop a chart title. I find having a chart title, and also having, I might just make these actually a little bit bigger so people can see them. Having risk and impact properly noted. These are all concepts talked about in good graphing books. And maybe just moving this up actually so that you can see it, and again just by clicking here and moving it up, it'll move the graph up. Risk and impact as well as costs can be viewed here. To get data labels added to your bullets here, you can right click and say, well, in this case, format data labels. And because I have added them already, normally you get the add data labels, and once here you have a selection. I mean, you could select the series name, the XY values, etc. Each one of them will provide you with a different data label. You could put them all in and include a separator, such as putting them on a new line as an example. Now, as to the bubble chart, if we select the data by right-clicking and saying Select Data, once again, all of this is above in your chart tools as well if you need to do that. Select Data. And going into my editing of ranges, essentially we have on the x-axis our risk, y-axis the impact, and d-axis or d column we have the cost. And that produces this three-dimensional graph. Now, this data and this chart, or this chart here, and this chart over here are actually the same data. But what I find is that, and this is sort of to the power of scatter graphs that we will talk about, what I find is that the two or three-dimensional sort of chart here, it really makes it hard sometimes to see some of the differences, whereas on this chart, either by size of a bullet, if that's what you're looking for, if you're saying, well, what are my more risky projects, I go over here, it makes it a little bit easier to find what you're looking for when you need to. So try to go through the various different types of charts, 1, 2, 3, and then a bubble chart, just to show you these various types so that you can understand in building them which ones may be more appropriate for a particular activity than another.